First Lieutenant John P. Meyer, United States Army, Korea, the Forgotten War. I had the great pleasure and opportunity of meeting and interviewing John in Fargo, North Dakota. It was my first trip to Fargo. I've been there many times with my work. It was September 18th, 2010. He was 77 years old. He passed away in 2016 at the age of 83. One of my all-time favorite Korean War veterans. He tells a great story. John served with the North Dakota National Guard, with the 188th Field Artillery Battalion, and then when he went to Korea, he served as a forward observer with the 31st Field Artillery Battalion, and then also as a sergeant, a reconnaissance sergeant with the 17th Regiment, Infantry Regiment, which is all part of the 7th Infantry Division in Korea, one of the infamous Army divisions during the Korean War. So John tells a great story, folks. You're going to love this. He's one of my favorite guys. Like I said, was such a lovable man. I was in Fargo about a year and a half ago, and I went to his gravesite where he's buried. He's buried 2 graves down from the famous baseball player Roger Maris. Visited his gravesite too, but John was just one of those great guys. I got to know him and his wife Lillian, and he's one of my heroes in heaven now, looking down on us. And like I said, he tells a great story. He was just a great man even after the war, the things that he did with his life, and I'm just so pleased to feature him on the Voices of History channel. By the way, my documentary series is called Lest They Be Forgotten. I don't mention that enough. I wear this little commemorative lapel pin here. I always give this to a World War II veteran when I'm interviewing veterans. But that's my documentary series. I purposely named it that because if we don't remember, we're going to forget, folks. Lest They Be Forgotten. So over the years, that's been the title of my documentary series. This is called the Voices of History channel, but all of these stories were included in my documentary series. So, Brandon Glidden, I want to look in this camera again and say thank you, brother. I love you. Thank you for sponsoring John's story, making it possible for others to hear these stories from Korea, which is referred to as a forgotten war, Brandon. We're doing a good job here. We're remembering these veterans and what they did in war, what they did as part of service to our country. And you know, overall, folks, history is best learned from those who were there. And these stories are like a fine wine. They get more valuable with time. And I haven't actively been interviewing veterans for a while, but I'm thinking about doing it again this year with some of the Vietnam veterans. So we'll see how that works. But some of you are emailing me and asking me about that. As we gather the resources together for that, we'll go out. So Brandon, God bless you, brother. I salute you for your patriotism and your support of my work and your dedication to our country. You're a great man. And you've served in the United States Army too, so we salute you. Amen. Okay, folks, here we go. If you want to sponsor a story, people are contacting me, asking me how they can do that. Well, there's information in the video description, which is just below the video. Look at the information in there. There's a link on there you can click on. Simple as that. Or in the comment section, when you go to comment on this video, which I hope you do, you can donate to my work. Or if you go to larrycapetto.com, there's a link that says sponsor a vet, and that's another way you can do it. And when you go to that link, you'll see it's over 100 veterans that I've interviewed. I've done 1,000 interviews, but there's about 100 of them there that are featured. Some of them have been sponsored, but I'm continually updating and adding to that. So you can see the face of the veteran when they serve, and you can decide if you want to sponsor him or her. And it would be greatly appreciated. And I know a lot of the families of these veterans would appreciate it too. So anyways, today is January the 15th, 2023 as I record this message. And I just want to say hello out to Lillian and your daughter Kathy, who are up in Fargo. And all my Fargo veterans and family up there, I love you. I love you, I love you, I love you. You've been a great family to me, a second family. Like I said, I've done a lot of work in Fargo. And John Meyer was one of my first veterans I interviewed, and he was with us at our school presentation in 2013 and 2015. So I've done some school programs with John. So I salute you, John Meyer. God bless you, sir. We'll see you soon. And I thank all of you for watching and subscribing to this channel and sharing these videos. It means a lot. It goes a long way. So let's take ownership in this work, okay? Amen. God bless you.
I was 78 a week ago today.
What year did you go into the military?
I went into active duty on January 16th, 1951. I went into service with the North Dakota National Guard unit from Minot, North Dakota. We were put on alert at Christmas time of 1950.
Okay.
And I was a senior in high school, and in those days, there were no waivers. If you belonged to the National Guard and your unit called, you left. We went. So the last, the last 3 evenings in Minot, one of the senior high school teachers stayed after school with me, and we finished the first semester tests. You needed 16 credits to graduate. I did well on those tests, and when they were over, I had 17 and a half credits, and I'll be forever grateful to Miss Ackerman for what she did, because without that, I wouldn't have had enough credits, and I never thought that, to stay home and take those tests.
Where did you go to basic training?
Camp Rucker, Alabama. At that time it was Camp Rucker. Now it's Fort Rucker.
It's where they do the helicopter training.
Yes, yep.
So what was your MOS?
I was a 3705, which is a forward observer in the field artillery. And after infantry basic training, we trained as a forward observer, and I was one of the few people who, when we went to Korea, or when we got to Korea, I did what I was trained to do. I became a forward observer in the 31st Field Artillery Battalion of the 7th Infantry Division.
And when did you actually go into Korea? What month and what year and all that?
We left the United States in September of 1951, and I got to Korea about the middle of October of 1951. It was at Camp Stoneman, California for about a week. It took 15 days to get to Japan. We landed at Yokohama. And then after a few days there, we were issued new M1s, and we sighted those in, and then took a train across the island and left Sasebo, Japan for Busan, Korea, and then, the train ride up to the front. It took about a month, so it was about the middle of October.
It's starting to get cold then?
Yes, yeah.
You're in the Army.
Yes.
So you're there, how long were you in Korea?
Well, I was in Korea just a few days less than a year. What happened was, at that time we needed what was called 36 points to come home, and you earned points by what you did. Frontline soldier got four points a month. Then, the support troops got 3 points a month, and rear area got 2 points a month. And I'm getting a little ahead of my story. You also, after you'd been there a few days, or a few months, you got a trip to Japan. It's called R&R, 5 days rest and recuperation it was called. I was ready for my second R&R, and I chose not to go because in the entire battalion, of 500 and some people, I'm number 3 to go home. And I thought, I'm not going to go to Japan, because what if the levee comes down while we're in Japan? I'm going to miss my trip home. The people that went on R&R with whom I should have gone left one day, and I was wounded the next. So actually, by staying in Korea, that time bought me a little extra time in Korea rather than coming home early.
So you're a forward observer.
Yes.
Tell me about some of the combat. The first time you engaged the enemy, you fighting the Chinese, the North Koreans.
Yes.
Just tell me about the enemy and your job and some of the combat you were around.
And some of the things I'm sure that you won't want to use. My very first time on the front lines was on Heartbreak Ridge. The United States Army 2nd Infantry Division took Heartbreak Ridge. They had a lot of casualties. They were put in reserve, and the United States 7th Infantry Division relieved them. I was a forward observer in the 31st Field Artillery of the 7th Infantry Division. Now it's my first trip to the front lines. I weighed about 135 pounds. I was carrying a rifle in one hand, a can of water in the other hand, and I had a case of sea rations on my back. We were going up to our outpost. It was so steep, I let the water go because I had to pull myself up with tree roots, and this one you're not going to use. One time when I grabbed what I thought was a tree root to pull myself up the hill, it was a leg. A tennis shoe came off, and the heavy meat on this person's heels was a Chinese soldier. So there, you're laying in the snow, and I threw up, and you know how some of those things could happen. It's so unrealistic. And then we had gone probably another 25 or 30 feet, Larry, and I found his head. Found his head. I have a picture of it at home. We had that, one of the guys that was on our team, for whatever reason, put this thing where you enter our bunker. And one night when I was on guard duty, I had to step outside to tend to wants of nature. And when I bent down to get back into our bunker, I came face to face with this head, and I just threw it over the hill. I thought, I don't need this. That was stupid. You know, it's so cold. When we got to Korea, when we were on the front lines, or when we were going there, we landed at Busan, then took a train from, we went up through Daegu, Daejeon, over to Incheon, Seoul, and then Chuncheon, where the 7th Infantry Division rear area. And to me, being in the Army had always been an adventure until we left Chuncheon. Now we're on a truck, and we're going to the 31st Field Artillery Battalion. And it was an adventure until I heard the first howitzer go off that was behind us. It was what we call the Kentucky Long Tom. Now it's real. Now you're there. And the whole attitude changes. I had just passed my 19th birthday. And when I finally went to sleep that night, or a couple nights later, you think about the kids at home that we went to high school with. You know, I should have graduated high school last spring. You know, their big concern would be who you're going to take to the football game, or who's going to go to the movie with you on Saturday night. And now I'm thinking, am I going to be alive the next day? And it changes your whole outlook on life. You know, it's so, because then there was a guy whose parents had both died, so he came to live with us. He and I went into the Army at pretty much the same time. The person I felt most sorry for was our mother. I got home on my delay en route in the afternoon. Merle left home that morning. Missed him by about 6 hours. He went to Camp Stoneman, California. I went to Camp Stoneman, California. We got to Camp Stoneman late at night, and the next morning I asked somebody, and it was called Base Locator, to see if they could help find this guy was so close to us. I called him my brother. If he could help me find my brother. Well, he did. His ship left that morning. So then the only way you can find out where the other person is, we had to wait till we got to Korea, and then you write home, and by that time your mother probably has heard from the other guy, where is he? Well, by the time I found out where Merle was, he was back in Japan in the hospital. He was assigned to E Company, the 7th Regiment of the 1st Cavalry Division. And he got shot so bad. He got 3 bullets. And he was in the hospital then from from October to March. I finally, on my first R&R, there were 3 places you could go: Tokyo, Osaka, and Kokura. I asked if I could go to Tokyo because Merle was in the hospital in Yokohama. I got there, and you're not going to believe this. Got there, I called the hospital. Merle had left about 3 days earlier. His unit had rotated from Japan to Hokkaido. And I did get to talk to him on the telephone, and he didn't tell me, but he already had orders to come home. And I think the person that I felt the most sorry for after we came home, for example, was our mother. Because in those days, sometimes, they didn't send casualty assistance officers. They just sent a telegram. Our mother at that time, and I'm one of 14 children, our mother at that time was younger than our youngest daughter is now. And so they're getting ready to eat supper, and here comes this Western Union kid on a bicycle coming up to the house, and my mother, which one? So then she got the telegram, and they read it, and it was Merle, and he was in the hospital. And then later, when I was wounded, she sees a bicycle coming up again, and now she knows which one, but you don't know how bad it is. And can you imagine what these people went through? And there are so many bad things in addition to the lives lost and the human resources that are lost. It's such a waste because, when we think of our parents and our families, what about the families of the enemy soldiers? They have feelings too. And it's such a waste. It's such a waste.
Well, you saw quite a bit. I mean, what you've told me, I can only imagine. I can't tell you I understand it. I've talked to so many veterans. I've done a film on the Korean War, the Forgotten War, Vietnam and World War II, but, and I'm not after the blood and guts of war, but, if you can keep the glasses off, I get a better picture. There's no glare. Is that okay with you?
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
I was going to tell you that, but continue on. Heartbreak Ridge, you hear about it. I think there was a movie, but what was the significance of Heartbreak Ridge? And you said we lost a lot of people there.
Well,
you were around this, right? You saw all this.
Yes, yeah. As a matter of fact, I found one dead Chinese soldier, and as we were putting up batteries for our portable radios on various points, I also found 2 dead American soldiers, who had been missing in action. And the only thing I remember, one was, I don't remember his name. I didn't see his dog tags. You just tell the people in charge where this person is. And he was from Birmingham, Alabama. The only thing I know about the guy. The other guy was from some town in Michigan, and I don't know what their names were. And personally, I'm glad I don't. There are some good things.
Heartbreak Ridge, though, what type of combat's going on? Are the Chinese attacking at night and you're taking it back during the day, or we're up and down a hill? What are you doing?
This was in the fall of 1951. At Thanksgiving time in 1950, the American forces were almost at the Yalu River. And as a matter of fact, some of the people were. So then the Chinese came, and the Allied forces were pushed back. And now 8 or 9 months later, they're on the way back north again, and it was just where the Chinese put up a terrible, terrible fight. And where it got the name, one of the guys from one of the regiments in the 7th Infantry Division, you know, and you go over one hill and there's another one. Of course, the farther north you go, the more mountainous it gets. And, you know, he just kept saying, this is a heartbreak. This is a heartbreak. And the movie, Heartbreak Ridge, that's a Hollywood story.
Of course. But this was named after what a guy had said?
Yes.
Wow.
Well,
and you're in and around all this, the casualties, did it go on for a day, a week? I mean, how long was this?
it went on for probably 3 weeks, maybe longer. And, you know, the blood and guts thing, you know, one of the worst things, you know, as a forward observer, we were pretty busy. I was in the 155 battalion, and actually we could cover the division front. You know, our howitzers could reach 4, 5, 6 miles. You can hear bullets hit. It's just like going hunting. So you hear this bullet hit. And I was pretty busy. And pretty soon, though, we heard a helicopter. And it landed behind this hill, you know, downhill from us and back. And as they were loading, tying the stretcher onto the helicopter, this guy's leg fell off. And you often wonder who the guy was, where is he from, did he live, what did his parents, you know, who is he? Completely by accident, completely by accident. In the late 80s, early 90s, somewhere in there, it was at a North Dakota County Veteran Service Officers Training Conference. You know, people who have seen or been in combat very rarely talk about it, and I hadn't talked about it hardly to anyone. One day, I was talking with this guy who was a veteran service officer from Lemoore County, North Dakota. And he was telling where he got hurt, where he was, how he left, what happened when they were putting him on the helicopter, and by God, that was the guy. I was a veteran service officer for Cass County. He was the veteran service officer for Lemoore County. He did make it. He did live, and he passed away in the late 90s, I think 95 or 96, somewhere in there. Nice fella. Gosh, he was a nice guy.
Wow. I'm thinking about so much right now. Did you mention you felt invincible? Did you feel invincible at all? Or, I mean, when you first arrived and then the reality of the bullets and death, I mean, changes your perspective, you said, but do you ever feel invincible?
No. No, I lived with, I think sometimes one of the reasons it's a little difficult for me to talk about is because I lived almost in constant fear. And, you know, the kids that I went to school with, they're home and they're going to movies and football games, or they're in college, some enlisted in service. And we had a horrible time. And there were some other good things that happened. You know, we'd go to the rear area, and I would take sometimes candy bars we had were old or things like that, or some food was old. One time when I went back, I saw a little Korean kid had had a gallon pail, and he had holes put in the bottom of it, and he dipped to the bottom of our garbage can, let the coffee and that stuff run off it, and then run to beat heck. The big pieces in this pail was what they ate. So after that, whenever I went to the rear area, I would take some food, and you see these little kids, and you give them like Chuckles candy, some black, green, orange. They just loved candy. And I'm the fourth oldest of 14 children. I had younger brothers and sisters at home the same age as these kids, and I'm thinking, they have warm beds and they have food, and these kids are probably sleeping on a straw mat in a tent somewhere, or under a rock. And I was still, another good thing that happened to me, I was still 19 when I had gotten a couple of promotions, and at age of 19 I was made the section leader of our, what we call them, our FO section, Forward Observer section. And that might have been one of the youngest in the 7th Infantry Division, 19 years of age, and you're section leader. But it was...
Are you when I say religious man, I mean, did your faith help you through these hard times? How'd you get through these?
Oh yes. I pray every day. Yeah. My first choice of vocation was to be a priest. So did religion play an important part? Absolutely. Yes. I heard a saying one time, this is not mine, I read it in the book. There are no atheists in the foxhole.
Were you around any of the wounded or dying Americans?
Yeah.
What comes to mind when I ask you that? And was there an opportunity to help somebody, or to hold somebody, or comfort somebody?
The only time that I was real close to people that had been wounded for any particular period of time was when I was, when we went from the front lines, you get picked up by the medics. They came up the hill with a Jeep that had a stretcher. There was a road partway up there. And then on the way back, we went through to the hospital. We came on it would be like a 3/4 ton weapons carrier that had the Red Cross. You ever see any of the TV programs, MASH? Those ambulances. There were 4 of us in this one, and I was laying on the top bunk on one side with my head toward the door, and I'm looking down at this guy over here, and you could see part of his he was wounded so bad. Then in the hospital, we visited with some people. There was one guy, I'm 19, and this guy looked so old. He must have been at least 35, which was old to me, but he was a holdover from World War II. Had made a career.
Can you define combat for me?
I think combat is probably one of the worst things that could happen to a human being. When now you're going out today and you know that somebody's going to try to kill you, and you know that you're going to try to kill somebody else. That's horrible. That's horrible. If you're going to define combat, I don't know how you'd do that.
What about the sound, the smells of combat? I mean, everybody probably has a different perspective, but is it loud, noisy, obviously? I mean,
Yes, very, very loud, especially, when, the battalion with which I worked as a Forward Observer was a 155 battalion. And you'd have to sense the rounds, where they landed, you watch them, And while it's loud around the gun when it goes off, it's pretty loud too when the shell explodes. And the smoke, you can smell it, cordite. And especially when it was cold, if you were down in the valley with the heat and so forth, it would make, a fog. I remember one time when we were still on Heartbreak Ridge, we had to quit because we couldn't see. It was too foggy and smoky. It was so cold. And the fog and the smoke from the shells. And
Well, you said constant fear. I mean, but you weren't right at the front lines, but you said you were up at the front lines. So, I mean,
I was on the front lines as a forward observer. We spent half, in our battalion, and a lot of battalions operated differently. We had two teams, on the line a week, off a week, on a week, off a week. And the week that we were off the line, we worked in the Fire Direction Center. So, yeah, as a matter of fact, there was one place we were a little ways ahead of the infantry, where our observation post was. So half of the time that infantry people had it a lot worse than we did, because we got and when I say off the line, it was back about 4 miles. It was with our, as the bird flies, we were with our battalion. But those infantry guys, those poor guys, they were up there all the time. And when we were off the line, we got to sleep in tents. They'd sleep in a hole in the ground.
how did you get through the winter? Tell me about the cold.
The cold was just fierce. I have, on one of my fingers, it's still a little numb. I have no fingerprints on it because it froze. I froze this hand, and that finger's still today numb, because when the skin came off, the fingerprints didn't come back. Oh, they're there, but they're very, very faint. Put up with the cold. I used to, sometimes just take my shoe packs off and get into a sleeping bag. And now I would put the shoe packs inside the sleeping bag with me, so that if we had to get up and go at night, and move, at least I knew where my shoes were. And one place we didn't want the Chinese to know we were there. It was so cold, our C rations froze. So the only time we ate was at night. Now what happened was, we had little tiny burners, and I bought this from some kid who had bought one in Japan. It folded up, and it had little white pellets. And if you take a can opener and open the can of C rations so it doesn't blow up if it gets hot, put that on this little thing, light this little white pellet, and if you cover it so the Chinese can't see the smoke or anything, after a while it would at least get warm. I remember trying to eat peach sauce with a knife. You take the chunks and the sauce. And my favorite food was wieners and beans. That was okay. There are some mistakes we made too. My wife and I have 7 children. And when I get past the physical again, I went back into the National Guard. And I always wore fatigues, or at least just a shirt and dress trousers, but I never wore ribbons. One morning, when our oldest daughter was 17 years old, she was getting up and she had a job at McDonald's. And she was getting to go to work at the same time I was getting ready to go to guard drill. And I had on my dress uniform, and she said, "Dad, what are those?" And I said, "Well, those are awards that I earned when I was in the Army." And she said, "When were you in the Army?" You know, because you don't have to try to impress anybody.
Talking about a Purple Heart, what did you have?
I do have a Purple Heart.
You have Bronze Star, Silver Star?
No, I was nominated once for a Silver Star, and I don't know what happened to it. I never got it. What had happened, we had a land telephone line, which was, the wire was laying on the ground. We were being shelled pretty good, and our phone went dead. Well, I was born and raised on a farm, and if a wire breaks, if it's not tight, it's going to be right there. So I got out of a bunker, and I had the wire in my hand until you run to the end. The artillery shell did break that wire. So then I went back a ways, found the other one, brought it up, put it together, and reestablished some communications. I don't know whatever happened to the commendation. I never got it.
I think I read something in one of those articles about you talking about the young people. How important is it for our young people to learn about the history of what we're talking about here?
They need to know. What really gets to me is when you watch TV, all of the games that they have about wars and that stuff that little kids play, violence and that stuff. Little kids, I think, agree that war is glamorous. It is anything but glamorous. And when I see people pretend that they're shooting somebody, or somebody pretends that they get hit and now they're pretending that he's dead, personally, it really bothers me. All of the violent games that they have on TV.
I agree.
It's anything but glamorous. I heard, as a matter of fact, I saw, not too long ago, they were interviewing some kids about the military, and this one kid, he must have been smoking some left-handed cigarettes. He said he can't think of a better high than getting shot at or shooting at somebody else. Really? Hey, kid, the first time you get shot at, I think you're going to change your mind. What a statement.
Why is the Korean War referred to as a forgotten war?
The Korean War, well, I think what happened there, and the history of that one, as far as I'm concerned, goes back to the end of World War II. Germany was divided into Russian zones and Allied zones. In addition to that, Berlin was divided into East Berlin and West Berlin, and the Russians had the Russian zone and then the Allied zone. Well, when Germany was split up, they came up with an Iron Curtain.
Right.
People couldn't cross. To me, the 38th parallel in Korea was the Iron Curtain in Korea. I honestly believe, and I have no way of proving this, but I think that the leadership in Russia, Joseph Stalin, and his counterparts in China were pushing the envelope. You have North Korea separated by the 38th parallel, the Iron Curtain, and South Korea. And I think what was happening is that they wanted to attack that area to find out, is the United Nations really a United Nations? If we attack the South, how many people are going to get involved? We had people from Canada, England, France, New Zealand, Turkey. Even the little country of Luxembourg, which is about the size of our county, had an infantry regiment there. So it took about 3 years for those people to get the message. The United Nations is not going to let this happen, folks.
But the forgotten war, is it just because people don't know about it? I mean, it wasn't talked about.
I just don't know the answer to that one. It really wasn't talked about.
But you've heard that, right? It's
Oh,
referred to as the
absolutely.
Forgotten War.
Oh, yeah. It's been referred to
I
that as
called
long
my
as I
first
remember.
film Korea, the Forgotten War. So
What an apt title.
I'm getting ready to change a tape on you if you wonder what I'm doing here. I'm running out of tape.
Actually, without glasses, it's 2020. I had cataract surgery, and then they put in lens implants, and shoot, I can see well without glasses. The only thing I need them for is reading. Reading, and like when I drive, so I can see the gauges on the car.
I'm not going to, my purpose of interviewing veterans is not for the blood and guts of war, and I know you've seen a lot, but I'm not going to try to dig in and hear all these hideous things. You've already told me some stuff, but I still am interested in your perspective as a 19-year-old in combat. You know, there's a spiritual side of combat, there's a practical side of it, there's the fear, there's the enemy and all that, but so, you know, is there anything else that you could share about any other combat in Korea that might be apropos for what we're talking about, just from your perspective and, you know, life and death and the whole...
I think one, you know, if there was any good thing that came out of that one, first of all, you know, it at least kept South Korea free. But it also proved to the rest of the world that the United Nations really means United Nations. When they came together and fought in that peninsula, you know, there are quotes in history books and in the VFW, the American Legion, daily magazines. It was a very, very brutal war. There were there was 35 or 36,000 battle deaths. That's 1,000 a month on an average. But if there was a good thing, I think it may have stopped a bigger war. Because when like in the early 60s, for example, when the leadership in the communist bloc were pushing the envelope, I think the fact that the United Nations, I have no way of proving this, I'm not a history person, but I think when they took a look at, you know, we can push, but we're not going to shove, because the United Nations, I think, would have stepped in there again. The same thing like the Vietnam War, for example. A lot of people wondering how in the world did we get there? It's the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization. You know, it was by treaty, and it did unite, or does unite, a good portion of the world.
I'm going to ask you a question. I ask all the veterans this question about freedom, and I'm going to talk to the kids tomorrow a little about freedom, but what does freedom mean to you, John, as a veteran, as a citizen, and then the price for freedom?
My dad and his family were born in Europe. They're called Germans from Russia. My mother's family came from France. I'm a first-generation American. Freedom? There's no substitute for freedom. You know, when you go to the polls, for example, I ran for public office, by the way. And when, you know, anyone can run for office, and there's no, to me, there is no better satisfaction than being elected to public office. And then you listen to these people, you go to the church of your choice. The thing that gets to me is where there are radical religions that I think would still probably try to stay, you know, not the religion themselves, but some radical members of certain religions that would still like to enslave the world. Freedom, there's no substitute. This man that I told you that whose parents had both died, and he came to live with us. His father came from Russia. I have two uncles that were born in Russia. And, you know, when you think of how those people lived, and read the books that were of freedom, it's worth it. Now, when World War I, World War II, Korea, they were about freedom for the United States. I don't know whether you could, my personal opinion, I don't know whether today's conflict, you could say they're fighting for our freedom.
Yeah.
Are we the police of the world? I don't think so. And also the problems in the Middle East, those are civil wars. And I'm not sure we should be involved in them even. I have such mixed emotions. To let a man live and rule a country that, by his own admission, killed many thousands of his own people because they didn't believe him. And then Joseph Stalin, who says he's a piker, you know, where Adolf Hitler in Nazi Germany killed 6 million Jews. I think in the Russians, they killed like 25 million of their own people. Intellectuals and religious leaders and so forth, people that would question their rule, they'd go to prison and work them to death. And so we can, here in this country, the article in the paper that I brought, we live in the greatest country in the world. We can vote people in, and this is a quote by one of the guys, we can vote you in and we can vote you out. And we can express an opinion without fear of going to jail.
What does the American flag mean and represent to you?
Oh my. I can't think of anything that bothers me more than when somebody represents or misrepresents or mistreats the flag, because that flag is a representation of freedom. To have somebody desecrate the flag or you know, keep their hands in their pocket and chew gum while somebody's playing the national anthem, you know, things like that really bother me. The American flag, in my judgment, is a picture of freedom.
Well, you've seen a lot, John. I mean, are these memories that you'd rather forget, or is the war memories still a big part of your life?
Well, they're still a big part of our lives. Those are things that I don't think you could ever forget them. Whether you keep them in your mind all the time, that's up to you. But I tried to just get rid of it. And I did that until I became the liaison person for the American ex-prisoners of war in the VA. When you go to their conventions and listen to some of the things that they had done and some of the things that they had to put up with and be able to stand, you know, the beatings and the horrible treatment.
Did you know about Father Capon? Do you know his story?
Father Capon.
Is that how you pronounce it, Capon?
Capon.
Oh, what? Do you know about him?
I've read his story.
He was there about the same time you were, wasn't
Yes,
he?
and Father Capon, I think, earned the Medal of Honor, and I think he was a POW.
Yeah, I read his book. Amazing.
And I don't know whether he earned that medal or not, but I think he did. There was a priest from North Dakota who was also a POW, two, as a matter of fact. In North Dakota, we have a Karlsruhe, which is named after Karlsruhe, Germany, but we also have a Warsaw, which is named after Warsaw, Poland. Mm-hmm. Polish-speaking priest became the priest at Warsaw. And he just recently retired and went home. he went back to Poland. But that's okay.
We've just got a few minutes left, but you mentioned in the beginning of the interview how the whole experience changed your perspective of life. I mean, everybody was at home going to school, to the prom, football games, and you were over there, didn't know if you'd live the next day, but that changed you forever.
Yes, it does. You know, when I hear young people talk about some of the things that they had done when they were young, I missed out on that. And I don't know what I would have done. The biggest thing, I think, is when I came home, I didn't feel that I belonged to anybody. You know, on the way home, I turned 20. And I felt I was older, for example, than the kids I went to school with. But I also didn't feel comfortable going to parties and things like that. For a long while, I was a loner. I just didn't want to, you know, you go to work and go home. And that was it. Go to a movie every once in a while, go by yourself. I don't think I would have done that hadn't I gone into the Army when I did. But I'm glad I went in the Army when I did. You talk about freedom, and I mentioned my dad was born in Europe, or you know, his family. Probably because we were such a large family, my dad didn't own his own house until, it was in the 60s when the boys had gotten out of service. I mentioned before, I'm one of 14 children, 8 boys, 5 in service. When my dad built a house in the front of a garage, for whatever reason in the garage, in front of the garage, under his workbench, he had a cedar closet. And in that cedar closet, there was a 1st Cav Division, 2nd Infantry Division, 7th Infantry Division, United States Marine Corps, and an Air Force uniform. 5 uniforms. First thing Pa would show somebody when he was showing the house, Larry, was the cedar closet. He wasn't kidding anybody. He's not showing that cedar closet, he's showing those 5 uniforms and what his boys did for their freedom. And you know, you talk about some bad experiences. We had 7 children, but we have 8 grandchildren, 3 grandsons. Every Sunday in church you pray that these boys never have to do what Grandpa did. What a waste.
That's good. Maybe just one more question. What should our country remember about Korea, the Korean War, and that conflict?
Our country, I think, takes as good a care of its veterans as is possible. With the Veterans Hospitals and the GI Bill and the home loans and, you know, the different things our country does. They take good care of the military veterans, in my judgment. And I think if we don't learn anything else, do the best you possibly can to stay out of these conflicts. And I think we've learned that lesson in the past few years. And take a really good look.
So you saw a lot of men die in the battlefield, or was it
Yes.
just around you? You saw a lot of it.
Yes, and just as bad as seeing people die. People we killed. When we were using, it was called variable time fuses. You could set them to where an artillery shell would blow up X number of feet off the ground. You could set them for 50 feet, 100 feet. So, and if you have, you know, different artillery shells do different things. High explosives concentrated in an area or spreading out a lot of shrapnel. What about the people we killed? There's no glory in that. You know damn well that somebody had to be notified that their son or their brother died. And just think of where the world would be today if the billions and billions and billions of dollars that were spent during what's called the Cold War, if they could have been spent on medical research and hospitals and schools, and to think how much better off our world would be today. You know, those things, they broke these countries. You know, like some of the countries in the Middle East and North Korea, for example, one of the poorest nations on earth. But almost their entire budget goes to military expenditures. It's such a waste.
Two more things. One of them is, at the end of my films, if you watch them, I always ask the veteran to look into the camera and from where they're seated and give a salute. Can you do that for me? When you're ready, if you can just look right in that lens and go ahead, John.
Thank you for letting me be here today and for sharing these moments. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Now, stay right there. I normally have a still camera to take a picture of myself with you. Today, what I'm doing is I'm taking a picture with the video camera, so I'm going to come right next to you. So just hang out for a second, okay?
Should I lean back like
Yeah,
like
just sit right there like you are, and I'm going to come next to you. And then when I go home, I actually digitize this and take a snapshot of it. So I didn't bring my other camera because I